And what we know is that some habits matter more than others. Some habits, when they start to change, they set off this chain reaction in our lives. Within the academic literature, these are referred to as keystone habits. And I wanted to talk a little bit about keystone habits because one of the big questions, particularly for folks who are working with companies, for people who work in companies, for folks like ourselves who care about what our lives are like in companies, is how do keystone habits emerge within organizations? How do we identify the habits that our workplaces can teach us and that exist in our workplaces to make us into better, healthier people? And to tell you a little bit about that, I want to tell you a story. And it's the story of the King's Cross subway station. Now, I don't know, has anyone here ever been to the King's Cross subway station in London? Okay, a number of you have. So if you had been there before 1985, you know that the King's Cross subway station was this amazing place. It was the first and largest subway station in all of the United Kingdom. It actually had the first escalators that had ever been built in the UK. The subway station actually went 5 stories down into the ground, and it had these wooden escalators, some of which would go for literally 3 stories down. They were amazing. And on this October evening in 1985, a passenger comes off of the Piccadilly line subway station, the subway train, and at 7:14 in the evening, he starts walking up to the ticketing hall. Now, the ticketing hall is huge. It's like 4 or 5 times the size of this room. And this passenger, he walks over to this ticket taker, a guy named Philip Brickell, and he says to Philip Brickell, hey, listen, I was just on the subway, on the escalator, and it smelled, I saw at the bottom of it that there was this burning tissue, which that doesn't seem good. You should maybe go take care of that. And Philip Brickell says, okay, I'm a ticket taker, but that sounds worrisome. He takes the escalator down, he finds a burning piece of tissue, he goes over to the rubbish can, he takes a magazine out, he beats out the burning tissue, and then he goes back to his ticketing stand to take more tickets. What he doesn't do is he doesn't investigate why there's a burning tissue. He doesn't ask any questions about it. And even if he had, he wouldn't have known who to call. Because the thing about the UK subway system, the tube, is that it is huge. It transports 3 million passengers a day and has 19,000 employees. And it's so complicated that they have an organizational chart that looks like this. There's these 3 guys who are called the barons, and they each run their own little fiefdom. And they have lieutenants and sub-lieutenants. Philip Brickell actually worked for this guy right here. And if you were to ride that subway station across London, you would move from fiefdom to fiefdom, right? From responsibility to responsibility without any clue of what was going on. But everyone who worked there, they would have known because there were a series of unwritten rules about the London Tube. It was so complicated and so big that they basically said, look, we have to have these organizational habits, ways of getting things done. And the number one habit was, don't do someone else's job. Do your own job. If it's your job to take tickets, take tickets. Don't become a firefighter. If it's your job to drive a train, drive a train. Don't try and become a tour guide. Do your own job. Now, it was never written down anywhere, right? But it's just the culture of the organization. It's the habits that have emerged. But differently, the underground had silos. And these silos were its organizational habits. So, back to that night in 1985. A couple minutes later, another passenger comes off the Piccadilly line escalator into the ticketing hall. It's now 7:29 p.m., and he walks over to a cop. He says to the cop, listen, I was just on that escalator, and I smelled a little bit of smoke, so you might want to look into that. And the cop says, anytime you hear about smoke in a subway station, that's a worrisome thing. So he goes to the exit where his radio works, and at 7:36 p.m., he radios his dispatch. And he says, please let the fire dispatch know they might want to send some folks to the subway station. He does not radio the fire dispatch himself. What's weird is that there's actually a fire station half a block away from where he is. He could have walked over there. But there's another unwritten rule for the London Underground, which is stay in your lane. Don't freelance. If you're a cop, call cop dispatch. Don't call fire dispatch. A couple minutes after that, a train arrives on the Victoria line, and a guy named Derek Silver steps off at 7:40 p.m., and as soon as he steps off the train onto the platform, he knows that there's a problem. He can smell smoke in the air, and he sees people milling around, kind of looking panicked. You've been in situations like this, where people don't know what's wrong, but they know something's wrong. And he says to himself, this is terrible. I'm not getting off here. So he turns to get back onto the train that he had just stepped off of. But the doors have already closed. So he bangs on the doors. And the conductor can hear him bang. He sees the conductor. But there's another unwritten rule that's true for every subway system around the world, which is when you close those doors, you do not reopen them if you don't have to. And so the train pulls out of the station. And Silver, standing there on this platform, he starts to get worried. He says, okay, look, I need to climb the escalator up to the ticketing hall. And so that's what he does with everyone else. They start filing up. And when they get into the ticketing hall, he sees something. He sees this phalanx of firemen who have finally been alerted by the call that went from police dispatch to fire dispatch and told to go to the subway station. He sees this phalanx of firemen entering through one of the doors. But there's hundreds of people in the ticketing hall. And they smell the faint smoke, and then they look over and they see these firemen rushing in, and they all panic. And so they make a beeline for the exits, and the firemen can't make it in because all these people are pushing against them, trying to all escape at once. And at this moment, over 40 minutes have passed since the ticket taker saw that burning tissue, but no one has ever called dispatch and said, hey, there might be a problem here. Because it was no one's job. And so tragedy occurs. Because all the trains are still running, 3 trains come immediately into the station all simultaneously on the Victoria line, the Piccadilly line, and the Northern line. And as they do, they push in oxygen into the station in front of them. And this gust of oxygen coming into the station all at the same time acts like the bellows on this small fire that had been building underneath the Piccadilly line escalator. And as that oxygen hits that small fire, it causes it to grow much larger, much more quickly. Most importantly, it drives up the temperature to what's known as the flashover point. And the flashover point, for those of you who have never heard of it before, and I never had, is when a fire gets so hot so fast that everything in the immediate combustible area explodes into flame. And that's what happened. It was a small fire. It really didn't matter. But as soon as it reaches that flashover point, it ignites everything around it because there's so much oxygen. And because it's in this tunnel that's shaped upwards like this, containing the escalator, when that flashover occurs, it's like the blast from a shotgun shell at the base of a rifle. And it starts pushing all this fire up the tunnel until it explodes into the ticketing hall. In the immediate vicinity, the 30 feet that are around the entrance to the escalator, the temperature goes up 112 degrees in half a second. In the next 9 minutes, 31 people were killed. Now, the most terrible part of this tragedy, of this fire that took 9 hours for them to finally extinguish, is that 49 minutes passed from hearing about that burning tissue to when those people died. 49 minutes when anyone could have called dispatch and said shut off the trains, when they could have cleared out the subway station, when they could have turned on the sprinkler system that the station had but hadn't been activated. And afterwards, Parliament launched an investigation to find out why hadn't anyone done that? How could so many people make so many mistakes? What is wrong with this organization? And so they started investigating every single cause. And they went to the ticket taker and they asked him, why didn't you notify anyone? And he said, well, a couple years earlier, there had been an influx of American tourists. And American tourists, it turns out, when they come to London, they have a lot of trouble reading the signs. And they would say, why is there a circus in Piccadilly? I don't understand. And so the ticket takers became tour guides. They were helpful. They would help them navigate to the train they were supposed to be in. But as a result, the lines got long in front of the ticketing stands, and normal passengers said, don't do that. Do your job. Just sell tickets. Don't try and get outside of your lane. There was a really good reason not to become a firefighter if you're a ticket taker. Or the cop who called his own dispatch rather than the fire dispatch. Turns out a couple of years earlier there had been another fire at another station, and there had been cross chatter between the police and the firemen, and they felt like it had confused things. And so the word went forth, and an unofficial habit. Call your own dispatch. Don't call someone else's dispatch. Or when Silver got off onto the platform and wanted to get back onto the train, and the conductor wouldn't open up the doors again. That is true in every subway system across the world. It is a habit that conductors learn from the day that they begin training, because almost every single time a subway stops, someone gets off at the wrong stop. If they opened up the doors every single time someone knocked on them, every train would be late. And so there's a good reason not to open up those doors. Put differently, every single bad habit that existed that contributed to this tragedy, they all existed for a good reason, right? And this is true of every organization.